British ambassador to France, Turkey and the US. I mean, is he unlucky? Is it unfair? Because most of these accusations were all before he became Prime Minister.
Yes, a lot of it's been running for a while, you're right. And one of the reasons why Rishi Sunak is Prime Minister is because several other people had a go at it and it didn't work out. So he was not the first choice of a lot of Conservative MPs, which is one of his problems. He's got a rather fractious party, of which he is now the leader. But he's also got some individuals there who've been, if you like, under investigation for a while. Gavin Williamson, who you mentioned just now, has gone. He's been fired 3 times in about 4 years for bad behaviour as a member of the cabinet. Suella Braverman under investigation, as you say. The Dominic Raab stuff has been talked about for many years, NDAs and all sorts of allegations about bullying and, you know, where...
How do they survive?
Well, there, I think the details of those cases have been kept quiet because of these non-disclosure agreements. And now there is an investigation going on. When will it see the light of day? I cannot tell you.
So is the PM, when it comes to Zahawi, is his offence, in a sense, not sacking him when the allegations first surfaced? And it took him a while before he set up the independent investigator by Sir Laurie. But he moved quickly once Sir Laurie's report came out, which tonight is being questioned as being unfair.
Yes, he moved very quickly when the report came out, and there's some questions tonight about whether Sir Laurie was fair, whether he gave Nadim Zahawi a sufficient chance to set out his side of the story, and so on. But I think what he was very keen to do, the Prime Minister, was to ensure that there was a fair process and that he didn't just sack the guy simply because of the allegations. And that's reasonable enough, seems to me.
Now, the good viewer of Questmeans Business tonight doesn't really care too much about the minutiae of the Conservative Party or indeed the fortunes of any one minister. What they care about is whether or not there's something smelly. Is there something smelly and unpleasant going within the British government, do you think, that this government needs rooting out?
I would say, without having lots of inside information, Richard, that we've got a Prime Minister now who is clean and young, different, hasn't been around for a long time, but he is the head of a government which has been in power for 12 years, where there's a lot of people who have got, you know, somewhat tarnished reputations, and therefore he does need to clean things up, because there is a sense at the moment that this government's been there too long and there's too many people in positions of authority in cabinet who shouldn't be there.
Now, I need you to stay where you are, if you'd be as kind, sir. We'll go for another story and then I'm coming back to you for second dibs, as they say.
OK.
The president of South Africa says... Turkey's President Erdogan is threatening Sweden's potential membership of NATO. Tension's been building between the countries for some time now. It culminated in protests over the burning of a Quran outside Turkey's embassy in Stockholm. Mr Erdogan said this.
Let me say something here this evening. We can give a different message about Finland if necessary. And when we give a different message about Finland, Sweden will be shocked. But Finland should not make the same mistake.
You're a former ambassador to Turkey. What's he playing at here? He must know that, would he really admit Finland and not Sweden, knowing that the 2 prime ministers have been so close that we go together?
There are some very difficult elections coming up in Turkey. President Erdogan's brought forward the date to the middle of May. He's under attack from a lot of different people who would like his job. He's been there for 20 years. A lot of people think it is time for change. What do you do when you are a head of government and you're under attack and your polling is poor? You find foreign enemies to blame for things that are not going right. He's done a bit of that in northern Syria. He's blamed America for this and that. He's actually done quite a handy role in trying to mediate between Ukraine and Russia. But in terms of all this NATO stuff, I don't think he's going to relent until those elections are over. He seized on the burning of the Quran, but we know who burned the Quran, a guy who was paid to do so, it seems, by the Russians, in order specifically to sow division within the NATO alliance. So I hope that people are advising the president of Turkey, look, be careful what's going on. There are people who are playing you, and this is a much more important issue than just one burning of a Quran, however offensive that may be.
Lots of talk in Britain tonight about the strength of the British forces and whether actually they're up to snuff. Have they actually got the right equipment, the right people? Are they actually able to make a decent contribution here?
I think what's significant this time around, Richard, is that the Defence Minister, the Defence Secretary of State, have both come out and said that what an unnamed American general has said about UK military capabilities is right, that we are under-resourced, that we haven't got enough people, and that the UK is not the top-tier force that it was and the immediate first-choice ally for the United States. I used to have this from President Obama and the late, much-loved Ash Carter when he was Defence Secretary, when I was Ambassador in Washington. They were complaining then that we weren't capable enough, and now I'm afraid our capabilities have gone further down.
Right, but if you are the Prime Minister, and today there was a massive announcement about new nurses and new ambulances, and you have had people saying the health service is the worst last winter that it's ever been, where do you put your priorities? Health and votes or defence and strength?
Well, one of the things you've got to do is ensure that the money you spend on defence, which is a lot, is properly spent. We've just frittered $5.5 billion on a light tank made by General Dynamics in America, which doesn't work at all. Whereas the French have spent the same amount of money on a light tank where they've got hundreds of them that do work. So there's an issue about procurement quality, a bit of bad luck, I'm sure, as well. It's not just how much, it is how you spend and what you do with that defence budget.
Thank you very much, sir. I'd hate to see really bad luck.